The cup he set down would save $90 million before the coffee went cold. At 8:42 on a rain-gray Tuesday morning in Manhattan, Daniel Whitaker stepped out of the executive elevator on the 42nd floor of Meridian Crest Capital carrying a black service tray with 12 cups of coffee balanced in 2 careful rows. The floor was too quiet for a company in trouble. Behind the glass walls, assistants moved quickly without speaking, phones glowed on polished desks, and the city below looked washed and distant through the rain. Daniel wore a white coffee service shirt, dark slacks, and a plain black apron with a small burn mark near the pocket from the espresso machine downstairs. His sleeves were rolled neatly to his forearms. His shoes were clean but old. In his shirt pocket, hidden behind the folded order slip, was a small calculator keychain his daughter Mia had pressed into his hand that morning because she said it made him look like he still knew numbers. He had smiled for her then. He was not smiling now. The boardroom doors were open, and the sound inside had the tight, dry edge of people pretending not to panic. A marble table stretched beneath a ceiling of soft white light. Laptops covered the surface. Legal folders sat open beside untouched pastries. On the front wall, a merger model filled an 85-inch screen, and one number burned in red near the center of it, $90 million. Olivia Carver stood at the head of the table with a black coffee already waiting for her that had gone cold. She was young for that room, sharper than most people expected, and tired in a way she would never allow anyone to name. Around her sat outside auditors, senior analysts, software engineers, and Russell Kane, the chief financial officer, whose silver pen kept tapping once against his folder every time someone asked where the error came from. Daniel entered quietly. That was part of the job. Coffee was supposed to arrive like weather, noticed only when it was missing. He placed the first cup beside an analyst with trembling fingers, the next beside an auditor whispering into a headset, and the third near Russell, who did not look up. When Daniel reached Olivia, he set her fresh black coffee beside the leather folder at her right hand. The red number on the screen caught in the reflection of the cup lid. Daniel looked at it for half a second longer than a coffee server was supposed to look. Then he looked at the small date column beside it. Something in his face changed, not enough for the room to understand, but enough for Olivia to notice. "Is there a problem?" she asked, coldly. Daniel straightened. "That date line does not match the liability roll forward." The room stopped for one breath, then Russell gave a short laugh. One of the engineers looked down at the table. Olivia's eyes moved from Daniel's apron to the tray in his hands, and whatever patience the morning had left in her disappeared. "You just make coffee," she said. A few people laughed because power had given them permission. Daniel did not answer. He only lowered his eyes, placed the last cup at the far end of the marble table, and turned toward the door. But as he passed the screen, he saw it again, a fiscal quarter that did not belong there, a legacy date hiding inside a number large enough to ruin a company. He kept walking. Behind him, the red $90 million stayed on the wall, waiting for someone qualified to notice what the coffee man already had. Daniel Whitaker let the boardroom doors close behind him before he allowed himself to breathe. Not deeply. Just enough to keep his hands steady around the empty tray. The laughter did not follow him into the executive pantry, but it did not have to. It stayed on his shirt, on the small burn mark near his apron pocket, on the place in his chest where pride used to stand before rent, school pickup, and medical bills taught him to move it out of the way. The pantry was narrow and bright, too clean to feel useful, with a chrome espresso machine hissing against the wall and a row of white mugs lined up beneath cabinet lights. Through the frosted glass behind him, the boardroom voices rose again, sharper now, each person trying to sound like the one closest to an answer. Daniel set the tray on the counter and looked down at his hands. There was a faint red mark across the back of his right thumb from hot milk that had splashed during the morning rush. He ran it under cold water for 3 seconds, then stopped because the phone in his pocket vibrated. The screen showed a voicemail from Mia's school. He pressed play and held it close to his ear. His daughter's voice came through small and careful, the way she sounded when she was trying to be brave for him. Dad, do not forget the science thing at 3. Mrs. Patel said parents can sit in the back. I put Mom's calculator keychain in your pocket so you remember. Daniel closed his eyes for 1 second. Outside the pantry, a man in a suit walked past without seeing him. That was how most people moved around service staff in that building, as if the trays carried themselves and the hands under them belonged to the furniture. Daniel reached into his shirt pocket and touched the tiny calculator keychain. It had belonged to Laura before the hospital visits took over the calendar. She had been a middle school math teacher in Queens, the kind who could make fractions feel less like punishment and more like a puzzle waiting for the right door. After she died, Daniel kept the keychain in a drawer for 6 months because looking at it made the apartment too quiet. Mia found it one morning and decided it should go with him to work, because mothers, in her opinion, were supposed to help even after they were gone. Daniel had once known rooms like the one behind him. Not as a guest. Not with a tray. Years earlier, he had sat in front of broken financial models until sunrise, rebuilding failed acquisition sheets for banks that called at midnight and paid for the privilege of sounding calm by morning. He knew hidden tabs, bad imports, old fiscal calendars, duplicated liabilities, and the small kind of mistake that could wear a clean suit and ruin a company. But after Laura got sick, the travel became impossible. After she passed, impossible became permanent. Coffee service gave him early hours, health insurance, and a manager who let him leave by 2:30 when Mia had school events. It did not give him respect. Respect was not on the benefits sheet. Daniel dried his hand on a paper towel and looked toward the boardroom through the frosted glass. The red number was not visible from here, but he could still see it in his mind beside that wrong date line. A fiscal quarter from Harbordine's old system. A liability roll forward that had been counted twice. A mistake large enough for experts to explain badly for hours. He picked up the fresh pot of black coffee and started preparing refills because that was the job he had been paid to do. Then the boardroom door opened, and a young analyst stepped into the hallway, pale-faced, holding a laptop against her chest. Daniel recognized her from the table. Emily Ross. She looked toward the pantry, then at him, as if she had been replaying his quiet sentence since he left. "What did you say about the date line?" she asked. Daniel looked at the clock above the espresso machine. It was 9:03. Mia's science presentation was still 6 hours away. The company had less time than that. Daniel did not answer Emily Ross quickly because quick answers were the easiest ones to dismiss. He looked past her toward the boardroom, where voices had begun overlapping again beneath the sealed glass, and he saw Olivia Carver standing at the head of the marble table with both hands flat against the surface. People like Olivia did not raise their voices unless the room had already failed them. "I said the date line does not match the liability roll forward," Daniel said. Emily's fingers tightened around the edge of her laptop. She was young, maybe 26, with the exhausted alertness of someone who had been awake long enough to know fear by its spreadsheet color. "That is what I thought you said." Behind her, Russell Kane's voice cut through the boardroom, smooth and irritated. "The problem is the external pricing feed. We are wasting time chasing accounting ghosts." Emily looked back once, then lowered her voice. "They have been saying that since 7. Daniel reached for the coffee pot because his hands needed something ordinary to do. "Did anyone check the Harbordine calendar import?" Emily blinked. "The acquisition target calendar. The old one." She did not respond, but the way her face went still told him the question had landed. Inside the boardroom, the 85-inch screen showed the same merger model across the front wall. Harbordine, a clean energy logistics company, was supposed to become Meridian Crest Capital's strongest acquisition of the year. The signing call with the bank syndicate was scheduled for 5 o'clock. If the model stayed broken, Olivia could delay and watch the market punish the deal, or sign with a $90 million distortion inside the risk exposure. Neither choice was really a choice. 6 specialists had already taken turns proving how expensive their uncertainty could sound. Two software engineers argued over the data pipeline. An outside auditor marked formulas with a red stylus and kept missing the hidden sheet because the visible one looked too clean. A senior analyst refreshed the pricing feed again and again as if a new answer might arrive out of embarrassment. At the far end, Russell Kane sat with his silver pen and calm jaw, repeating that volatility from the overnight market had created a temporary distortion. He said it with the confidence of a man offering a door he did not want anyone to open. Olivia listened, but not because she believed him. She listened because investors were waiting downstairs, because a reporter from a financial network had already arrived in the lobby, because the board chair had called twice before breakfast, and because one red number on one wall was now large enough to make every polished surface in the room feel fragile. Daniel watched from the pantry doorway as Emily stepped back inside and returned to her chair near the junior analyst station. She opened a secondary window and typed something with small, cautious movements. Russell noticed immediately. "Emily," he said, without looking away from the front screen, "do not fork the model unless I ask for it." Her hand stopped. Olivia turned toward her. "What are you checking?" Emily swallowed. "The legacy import calendar." Russell gave a short laugh that had no humor in it. "We ruled that out." "No," Olivia said, sharper now. "You said we ruled it out." The room tightened around that difference. Daniel lowered his eyes and poured fresh coffee into the pot, but he could feel the old pattern forming. A table full of experts, each one staring at the part of the system that made them feel safest, while the mistakes sat quietly in a cell too ordinary to earn respect. Through the open boardroom door, the red number glowed again. $90 million. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just wrong. Daniel picked up the refill tray and started back toward the marble table, because someone had to bring the room more coffee before it ran out of time. Daniel entered the boardroom with the refill tray at 9:18, and this time the room noticed him before the coffee. Not fully. Not with respect. But with the irritated awareness people give a small noise when a larger problem has already made them nervous. Olivia stood near the screen, one arm folded across her waist, the other hand holding a marker she had not used. Russell Kane sat at her right, his silver pen still tapping, though the rhythm had become less certain since Emily Ross opened the legacy import folder. The outside auditors leaned toward their laptops. The engineers watched their own dashboards as if the answer might be hiding behind a loading icon. Daniel moved along the marble table without looking important. He replaced cold cups, collected untouched ones, wiped a thin ring of coffee from the polished stone with a folded napkin, and let the voices pass around him. "The external feed variance is too narrow to explain 90 million, one auditor said. "Then widen the sensitivity range," Russell replied. "That does not solve the source. It buys time." Daniel stopped beside the sideboard where a stainless steel coffee pot sat under the soft ceiling light. In its curved surface, the large screen appeared warped and smaller, but the red number and the date column beside it reflected clearly enough. Sometimes mistakes became easier to see when they were bent out of their usual shape. Daniel looked at the reflection, not the screen. The model showed Harbordine's deferred liability roll forward across quarters, but one imported fiscal date carried the old acquisition target calendar, not Meridian's current one. It was being pulled into the active quarter as if it belonged there, then counted again through a hidden consolidation line. Not a market problem. Not a pricing feed problem. A calendar mapping problem with clean shoes and a very expensive shadow. His thumb tightened once around the handle of the coffee pot. Emily saw him pause. She had been watching him more than her own screen now, not because she trusted him completely, but because fear had made her more honest than rank. Daniel set the coffee pot down slowly. "That line is not from this quarter," he said. The words were quiet. They still reached the wrong years. Russell looked up. "Excuse me." Daniel kept his eyes on the reflected screen. "The Harbordine legacy calendar is pulling a prior deferred liability into the current roll forward. It is not new exposure. It is old exposure counted twice. The room did not laugh yet. It was worse than laughter. It was the silence before people decided whether someone was allowed to know what he knew. Olivia turned toward him. The black coffee he had placed beside her earlier sat untouched near her folder. "You are basing that on a reflection in a coffee pot?" she asked. There was sharpness in it, but also something else now, a thin line of doubt. Daniel looked at her for the first time since she had dismissed him. "No," he said. "I am basing it on the date." Russell pushed back from the table. "This is absurd. We have outside auditors, systems people, and a full risk team in this room. We are not taking financial modeling advice from service staff." Emily's voice came from the far end before she seemed ready for it. "The date is wrong." Everyone looked at her. She swallowed, then turned her laptop slightly toward Olivia. "He is right. Harbordine used a 445 fiscal calendar before the acquisition draft. Meridian does not. The import may be mapping the old quarter into the current one." Russell's face stayed smooth, but his pen stopped moving. Olivia looked from Emily to Daniel, then back to the red number on the screen. Daniel should have felt satisfaction. He did not. He felt the clock. He felt Mia's voicemail in his pocket, the science presentation at 3, and the old familiar pressure of a system failing while powerful people protected. The wrong part of it. He picked up the tray again, because standing still made him look like he wanted attention. "If you check the hidden consolidation tab," he said, "you will find the duplicate." Olivia's eyes narrowed. "And if we do?" Daniel walked toward the door, tray steady in both hands. "Then $90 million is not the problem," he said. "It is the symptom." Daniel was almost through the boardroom doorway when Olivia Carver said, "Wait." One word, clean and controlled, and every person at the marble table understood that the coffee man was no longer invisible. Daniel stopped with the tray in his hands. He did not turn quickly. He did not make the mistake of looking pleased. Outside the glass wall, Manhattan sat under a dull rain, the tops of buildings softened by clouds, while inside the room the red $90 million remained on the screen like a stain no one could wipe away. Olivia looked at Emily Ross first. "Open the hidden consolidation tab." Emily's fingers moved. Russell Kane stood before the page loaded. "Olivia, this is not a controlled review process." "Neither is losing $90 million before lunch," Olivia said. Russell's jaw tightened, but he sat down. Emily opened the tab. Rows of formulas appeared, gray and white, ordinary enough to look innocent. Daniel stood near the door, still holding the tray, while men and women with titles leaned forward to inspect what he had already seen from a bent reflection on a coffee pot. The duplicate liability line was there, pulled through a mapping table that should have been archived when Harbordine's calendar was converted. It did not announce itself. Bad errors rarely did. They hid in familiar places and trusted important people to be too busy to look. Emily highlighted the date column. "This is the old calendar," she said softly. One of the auditors exhaled. An engineer muttered something about permissions. Olivia turned to Daniel. "How much time would it take to confirm?" Russell answered before Daniel could. "He cannot confirm anything. He is not credentialed on our system. He does not have access, he does not have clearance, and he has no place in a board-level transaction." Review. Then he looked at Daniel with the kind of smile that did not reach the eyes. "Unless we are now letting catering staff run acquisitions." The second humiliation landed colder than the first because the room was no longer laughing from surprise. This time they laughed because they needed the old order restored. A few people looked down, embarrassed but silent. Daniel thought of Mia standing in a school gym later that afternoon beside her cardboard solar system, searching the folding chairs for his face. He thought of Laura telling students to show their work even when their answer was right, because truth without proof was just another thing people could ignore. He set the tray on the sideboard. Slowly. I do not need your system, Daniel said. I need a copy. Russell blinked. A copy? Read-only export. No permissions. No live data change. 5 minutes. Olivia studied him. She was still not convinced. She was too smart to become convinced just because the room had become uncomfortable. And if you are wrong? Daniel looked at the coffee cup beside her hand, the one she still had not touched. Then I leave before the coffee gets cold. No one laughed that time. Emily looked at Olivia as if begging her not to waste the one possible answer in the room simply because it had arrived wearing an apron. The outside auditor adjusted his glasses and said, a copy would be safe. Russell turned toward him. This is ridiculous. Olivia raised one hand, and Russell stopped. That hand had signed contracts larger than Daniel's old apartment building. It had fired executives, closed acquisitions, and moved markets before breakfast. Now it pointed at an empty chair at the far end of the marble table. Give him a copy, she said. Daniel did not move at first. The chair belonged to someone else. All the chairs in that room did. Then Emily carried her laptop to the end of the table and opened a duplicate file with shaking hands. Daniel sat down, pulled the calculator keychain from his shirt pocket, placed it beside the trackpad without explaining it, and looked at the clock on the wall. It was 9:31. 5 minutes was not much time. But it was enough time for the right mistake. Daniel did not touch the keyboard for the first 3 seconds. That bothered Russell Kane more than if he had begun typing immediately. People who guessed moved fast because speed made guessing look confident. Daniel sat still, looked at the duplicate file Emily Ross had opened, and let the model tell him where it was hurt. The marble table had gone quiet around him. Olivia stood behind her chair with her arms lowered now, the fresh black coffee beside her untouched. The outside auditor leaned in just enough to watch without interfering. 2 engineers had stopped arguing with their dashboards. Russell remained standing near the right side of the table, one hand on the back of his chair, his silver pen trapped between his fingers. Daniel checked the file name first. Then the timestamp. Then the import path. He opened the hidden sheets list and found the consolidation tab Emily had highlighted, but he did not stop there. He traced the formula backward to the mapping table, then backward again to the legacy calendar import from Heartfelt. His fingers moved with a calm rhythm, not fast, not slow, only certain. The calculator keychain from Mia rested beside the trackpad, tiny and plastic against the polished table, ridiculous in a room where every object had been chosen to look expensive. Daniel did not look at it, but he knew it was there. 4 minutes and 32 seconds remained on the wall clock. He is browsing, Russell said. That is not an analysis. Daniel opened the deferred liability roll forward, compared the quarter code against Meridian's fiscal structure, and highlighted one cell near the bottom of the mapping table. This field is using Heartfelt's old 445 calendar. His voice did not rise. Emily moved closer, eyes fixed on the screen. Daniel opened the duplicate liability line and followed its reference into a hidden consolidation formula. Here. He pointed once. The prior quarter liability is being imported as current exposure, then added again through the roll forward. One of the auditors whispered, that would double count it. Not all of it, Daniel said. Only the portion tied to the deferred service contracts. Olivia's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. She understood enough to know the shape of the answer before the number changed. Daniel copied the model into a sandbox sheet, disconnected the live feed, and changed one mapping reference from the old Heartfelt quarter code to Meridian's current fiscal calendar. He did not overwrite anything. He did not grandstand. He showed the work in a separate tab where everyone could see it. The red number on the large screen did not move yet because Emily had not mirrored the sandbox. On Daniel's laptop, the exposure recalculated. $90 million fell away like a door opening into silence. The corrected variance settled into a narrow range the auditors could actually explain. Emily covered her mouth with one hand, then lowered it quickly because the room was watching. The outside auditor leaned closer, checked the formulas, then looked at Olivia. The copy balances. Russell's pen slipped from his fingers and struck the marble table with a small sound that seemed too loud. Olivia did not look at him. She looked at Daniel. He turned the laptop slightly so she could see the corrected schedule, the changed mapping cell, the old quarter code, and the duplicate lines sitting beside each other like evidence that had waited patiently for someone to stop protecting the wrong theory. If you apply it live after audit approval, Daniel said, the $90 million exposure disappears because it was never current exposure. Olivia's hand moved toward her coffee, then stopped. She set the cup down without drinking. That was when the room understood. Not when the number changed. Not when the auditor confirmed it. When the CEO who had mocked him put down the cup he had brought her and stared at the man who was supposed to only know how to make it. The number changed first, but the room changed after it. For several seconds, no one spoke because everyone at the marble table understood the difference between a theory and a correction. A theory could be argued with. A correction sat there quietly and made argument look small. Daniel kept his hands near the laptop but did not touch anything else. He had opened a copy, traced the line, shown the duplicate, and fixed the mapping without entering the live system. That was all he had asked to do. The rest belonged to people with titles. Olivia Carver stood very still behind her chair, looking at the corrected exposure on Emily Ross's screen, then at the red number still waiting on the main boardroom display. "Mirror the sandbox," she said. Emily looked to the outside auditor. The auditor nodded once. Emily connected the display. The screen flickered. The red $90 million recalculated, collapsed, and disappeared into a small variance line the room could finally understand. Nobody laughed. The air conditioning hummed above them. Somewhere near the far end of the table, a coffee lid clicked softly as someone's hand tightened around a cup. Russell Kane cleared his throat. "That proves a mapping issue," he said. "It does not prove anything beyond that." Daniel looked at the screen, not at Russell. "It proves the error was not external." Russell's eyes narrowed. "You fixed one copy. I traced one source." Olivia turned slowly toward Daniel. "Is there another source?" Daniel paused. He had already said more than a man in his apron was supposed to say. He thought of Mia's science presentation, the back row of the school gym, the cardboard planets she had painted with careful little stars. He thought of Laura's voice from years earlier, telling him that numbers did not care who was embarrassed by them. "There should be an audit notification," he said. Emily's face changed. "For the calendar mismatch? For the duplicate liability import? A system that large usually flags prior period exposure when it appears in the active roll forward." One of the engineers looked up quickly. "It would. Unless the alert was dismissed." Russell put both hands flat on the table. "We are not turning a resolved modeling error into a personnel investigation in the middle of an acquisition call." Olivia did not look at him. She looked at Emily. "Open the audit trail." Russell's voice sharpened. "Olivia." That was the first real crack in him. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just too fast. The room heard it. Emily opened the audit log with careful fingers. Rows of system events filled the screen: imports, permissions, overrides, review notes, automated warnings. Daniel leaned back slightly, keeping his distance from the laptop, letting the employees of Meridian Crest Capital uncover their own truth. Emily filtered by calendar mapping. The first warning appeared 3 months earlier. Then a second. Then a third. Each one tagged the same duplicate liability risk. Each one had been archived without correction. Olivia stepped closer to the screen. "Who dismissed them?" Emily clicked the first record. The initials appeared beside the archive note. RK. The room became smaller. Russell's pen was no longer in his hand. It lay on the marble table beside his untouched coffee like something he had forgotten how to use. Automated flags produce false positives all the time, he said. His voice was controlled again, but control was not the same as safety. Daniel said nothing. He did not accuse. He did not point. He only watched the data do what angry words never could. Emily opened the second record. Same initials. Same archive action. Same warning. The outside auditor leaned toward Olivia and spoke softly enough that the room still heard. This should have been escalated before today. Olivia looked at Russell for a long moment, then turned back to Daniel, standing there in a coffee service apron beside the chair no one had meant for him to sit in. The man she had dismissed had not only found the error. He had found the place where the truth had been buried. Olivia did not ask Daniel how he knew until the audit trail finished speaking. That was the difference between curiosity and consequence. 3 archived warnings sat on the screen, each tied to the same duplicate liability import, each dismissed under Russell Kane's initials, each one dated early enough to make the morning's emergency feel less like bad luck and more like something quietly carried forward. Russell remained at the table, but his chair seemed farther from everyone now. He adjusted his cuffs, then stopped when Olivia looked at him. "Step out," she said. The words were calm enough to be worse than anger. Russell looked toward the outside auditor, then toward the engineers, searching for the shape of support in faces that had gone carefully blank. No one gave him one. He gathered his folder, left the silver pen behind on the marble, and walked out through the glass doors with a controlled stride that fooled nobody. The room stayed silent after he left. Rain moved down the windows in thin vertical lines, blurring Manhattan into gray towers and pale traffic far below. Olivia turned back to Daniel. He still sat at the far end of the table, the duplicate model open in front of him, the calculator keychain beside the trackpad, his coffee service apron hanging plain against a chair that had never been meant for him. "How did you see this that fast?" she asked. Daniel looked at the screen, then at the clock. It was 9:43. The day had already become longer than it had any right to be. "I used to repair models after failed integrations," he said. That was all. No title. No company name. No attempt to make the room regret itself faster. Emily Ross frowned slightly, then turned to her laptop and searched with the careful urgency of someone who understood that the answer mattered now. Her fingers moved across the keys. A few seconds later, her expression changed. "Daniel Whitaker," she said quietly. "Northbridge Systems." One of the auditors looked up. He knew the name before the others did. Northbridge built post-merger recovery models for 3 of the largest bank integrations after the last regional consolidation wave. Emily clicked another result. Senior Financial Systems Recovery Analyst. Led on legacy calendar reconciliation, duplicate exposure cleanup, acquisition model failure response. The words settled over the table one by one, each more difficult to fit beside the apron than the last. Olivia looked at Daniel's service badge, then at the corrected model, then at the tiny calculator keychain on the table. Her face changed again, but this time it was not shock. It was recognition arriving too late. "Why are you working coffee service?" she asked, and the question came softer than before because she already knew the answer would not be simple. Daniel closed the duplicate file but left the audit trail visible. "My wife got sick," he said. The room did not move. Travel stopped working. Nights stopped working. Then she passed, and I had a 7-year-old who needed someone at school pickup more than banks needed another midnight rescue. He touched the calculator keychain once with his thumb. "Coffee service starts early. It has insurance. They let me leave by 2:30. No one at the marble table had a clever response to that. Olivia looked through the glass wall toward the executive pantry, where the chrome espresso machine still hissed softly and clean white mugs waited in rows. The distance between that narrow room and this one was less than 50 feet. That morning, it had been wide enough for her to mistake a man's job for the size of his mind. Emily looked down, ashamed on behalf of people with more authority than she had. The outside auditor cleared his throat and said, "The live correction can be applied after formal sign-off." Daniel stood before anyone could make the moment about him. "Then you should get your sign-off," he said. Olivia looked at him, but he was already picking up the empty cups near the sideboard because the boardroom still had work to finish, and dignity did not require him to stop being useful. The live correction was approved at 10:12, and the $90 million distortion disappeared from Meridian Crest Capital's acquisition model as quietly as it had first appeared. No music rose. No one clapped. The boardroom simply became honest. The outside auditor signed the revised schedule, the engineers locked the corrected mapping, and Emily Ross sent the updated file to the bank syndicate with hands that no longer shook. Olivia Carver stood at the head of the marble table while the rain softened against the glass walls behind her, looking at the empty chair Russell Kane had left behind and the silver pen still lying beside his untouched coffee. "Russell Kane is suspended pending a full audit review," she said. Her voice stayed even, but the room understood that the decision had already moved beyond performance and into consequence. Then she turned toward Daniel Whitaker. He was standing near the sideboard with a stack of empty cups in one hand. Because habit had carried him back to service before anyone in that room had found the courage to speak to him as something more. Olivia looked at the apron, the burn mark near his pocket, the calculator keychain resting on the table where Mia's small gift had witnessed more truth than half the room. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, and the formal name made several people look down, remembering what they had called him with their laughter. Daniel set the cups down. "I owe you an apology," Olivia said. "Not privately. Not later. Now." The room held still. Daniel did not help her. He did not soften the moment for her. He simply waited. Olivia took one breath. "I judged you by the job you were doing in front of me, not by the person standing there. I was wrong. It was not dramatic. That made it better." Daniel nodded once. "Thank you." Emily's eyes were wet, but she turned back to her laptop before anyone could see too much of it. Olivia opened a fresh folder and placed it on the table. "Meridian needs a director of financial systems recovery. Not a consultant for the weak. A real position, with authority over integration risk, model audit response, and escalation policy. The offer is yours if you want it." Daniel looked at the folder, then at the clock. 10:38. Mia's science presentation was still hours away, but the day had a way of taking fathers from chairs they promised to sit in. "I have conditions," he said. Olivia did not blink. "Name them." "I leave in time for school pickup unless there is a true emergency. Not a prestige emergency. A real one." "Agreed." "Junior staff do not get punished for raising errors that make senior people uncomfortable." Emily looked up. Olivia said, "Agreed." Daniel touched the calculator keychain. "And you create a scholarship fund in Laura Whitaker's name for children who lose a parent to illness. Math, science, whatever helps them keep going." For the first time that morning, Olivia's confidence did not look cold. It looked useful. "Agreed," she said. The attorney at the far end began taking notes. Daniel did not smile wide. Men who had learned to survive grief did not always know what to do with sudden fairness. He signed. Nothing immediately. He read every line first. When he finished, he picked up Mia's keychain, slipped it back into his pocket, and called his daughter from the hallway outside the boardroom. "I will be there at 3, he said. Inside, Olivia watched through the glass as the man she had mocked stood beside the executive pantry, still in his coffee service shirt, speaking softly to the child who had kept him alive after everything else changed. Later that afternoon, when Daniel walked out of Meridian Crest Capital with a new contract in his bag and coffee still drying on his sleeve, no one at the 42nd floor called him the coffee man again. They remembered the number he fixed. Olivia remembered the cup she set down. And Daniel remembered that he had not needed to raise his voice for the whole room to finally hear him.